thanks for joining me today. My name's Jo and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator based in the UK. Today I'm going to show you how I've created this card here. Now this card is made up predominantly through using our dies that we have in with lots of our stamp sets. There is a little bit of stamping, but the vast majority of it is just made up from our dies, and I wanted to show you just how versatile sometimes they can be when they're doing something which they're not actually designed to do, if that makes sense. So hopefully I'll explain that to you by what I mean. Now these twig type dies are actually taken from the cherry blossom dies. So this is a branch of a cherry blossom, and you'd normally have like little flowers or whatever on here. But when I looked at this, I saw little berries on the bottom of these little round pieces here. So this is what forms this section. And then obviously these are pine cones, so these are quite obviously quite straightforward with what they are, and these are taken from the Beautiful Boughs dies, so I've used these two here. And then the background I have made using our Fluid 100 watercolour paper. Now this is a really beautiful paper that you can get some really nice effect backgrounds on it. So it's quite a basic background, but it was something that I wanted to make it sort of a little bit sort of moody but a bit wintry, and I've used paste as well to sort of give it some dimension. So hopefully I'll show you how it's all comes together. So I have pre-cut some of the bits and pieces, because obviously this takes a little while just to cut these things out. So I have pre-done some of it. But you are going to need, first of all, your card base. Now this is our thick whisper white. So I'm in the UK, so this is a standard A6 card, which is 29.75 long, which is the full A4 length by 10.5. And it's scored at 14.85 to give us our card base. I then have a layer of Poppy Parade red. I went for the poppy rather than the real red because I felt it gave it a little bit more vibrancy, so that's why I chose that colour. And this one measures, so it's 1/2 centimetre smaller, so it's 14.35 by 10 centimetres. And then this is our Fluid 100 paper, and this measures 13.85 by 9.5. So we're going to start with the background, because this takes a little bit of time to dry. So by the time we've done sort of everything else, hopefully it will be dry for us. Now, to create this sort of background here, I did a wash. Now, I have some of these little trays, which I think actually are little airline trays, if I remember rightly, somebody had. But they're really useful for mixing up some bits and pieces. So I'm going to be using our one of our water painters. Now this is the really thick water painter, so this is the nice thick flat brush. So that's going to be giving us our wash, and I'm going to be using 3 colours, and I'm using the re-inkers, but you could easily just use the ink pads if you don't have the re-inkers. It's just I had them to hand, so it kind of made sense to do that. And I've got Sahara Sand, Smoky Slate and Seaside Spray. And if you're using these, you literally just need probably a drop of each, no more. We can always add more if we want them. I'm just going to make a note which one is which, because they all look the same when they're on the actual tray. So that's grey, blue, and this one's Sahara. Okay, so that's my colours. I'm going to move my card out of the way for a moment because I don't want it to get wet. And this is just normal tap water. So what I'm going to do is I'm first of all going to give my piece of Fluid 100 paper a nice plain water wash. Now I want to get this to a level where it's reasonably wet but not absolutely saturated. Watercolour paper, you can get away with it, so don't worry too much. I'm then going to start off with a little bit of the grey. So I'm mixing up, because I don't want it too dark to begin with, and I'm literally just going to blob some of it onto my background. Now watercolour is quite forgiving in the sense that if you find that you've got a little bit too dark, you can add a bit more water and it will kind of wash it away. So don't worry too much about sort of how it's looking. I'm now going to add a little bit of the blue. So again, just make sure that you wash it down a bit. This is Seaside Spray. So I'm going to add a little bit of that in. As you can see, I'm not actually sort of following much where I put it. I'm just making sure that it's going down really. And you notice this is going to be our snowy section at the bottom, so I'm not worrying too much about going down too far. And then finally I'm going to go with the Sahara sand, which looks quite brown actually when you have it at this sort of mix, where it's got quite a lot of grey tones in it normally, but it does look quite brown on here. And I just want there to be a real mix of the three colours. So I'm not worrying too much about keeping them separate. I'm just sort of adding them to it. Now if I want it to darken a little bit, I can add some more. Or if I want it lighter, I can obviously leave it as it is. I think I'm quite happy with that. So as you can see, I'm just sort of blotting this down. I'm not really sort of stroking it too much because I don't really want too many marks from the brush. Okay, so I'm going to leave that to one side. Just going to clear my mess on my desk quickly here. Okay, so obviously that will have a chance to dry. I'm going to give it a quick blast with my heat tool because I just want to make sure that it's actually dry before I move on to the next step. Okay, so as you can see, that's now dry, and I've got sort of the nice sort of textured sort of background, which was what I was looking for. But I also want to add a little bit of white into that. So the way I did that was I used my Whisper White ink pad, and I've just got a sponge here, and all I did was I picked up some ink and then kind of blotted it over the background where I wanted it. And then once I've blotted it, I'm then going to go over and just smooth it around just to give some nice sort of white sort of texture in amongst all the other colours. I need to add a little bit of white to my pad. This is a new pad which I've not used a great deal, so it's sort of still finding its way, so to speak. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. Just going to shut my ink pad now. So the next thing I want to do is to create the splatters that went over the back of it. So these little spots here. So all I did was I took the larger of the two brush type water painters, and I literally brought my palette back in, and I took a bit of the Sahara sand. So I've got quite a nice lot on my brush, and I'm just going to tap it across the background. Don't worry if it goes over this bottom bit because we're going to put some paste on that in a second. And you can add as much or as little as you want. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so let's have another quick tidy up. So as you can see, that's now got all these little specks on it. They will lighten as they dry, so they're quite sort of darkish at the moment, but they sort of soften a little bit. I'm going to give them a quick blast again with the heat tool just so I don't smudge them. Okay, so that's my speckles done. Now what I want to do is I want to add some paste onto the bottom of this. Now this is our embossing paste that we use quite a lot for sort of snowy effects at Christmas time. And we have two types. We have our normal white embossing paste, which is what I used on my original sample, or we do also have the shimmery white embossing paste. So if I open this one, you can just see, I don't know whether you can see, it's got a very slight shimmer to it. It's really, really pretty, but I wanted to add more shimmer to this particular project, so I wanted it quite a lot of shimmer on it. So I've opted to use the plain white paste, and then I'm going to add some glitter to it once I've finished. So this is my little pot of glitter, so I'm going to bring that in so it's to hand. So what I want to do is to take one of the palette knives. Now I like this one sort of trowel like the plasterers use. I just find it's one of the easiest to use really. So I'm just going to take some on my knife, and first of all I'm just going to lay a thin layer over my card. Now I'm allowing it to go into that area, but I don't want it to be too high up there, so I'm just allowing that just to move across. I find this is easiest to try and just lay a layer first, and then you can sort of rough it up to make your snow. If you try and do the snow as you go, sometimes it sort of peels it back off the card. So by doing this, you sort of get a nice sort of layer on the background. Okay, so now I've laid that layer, what I'm going to do is just use the end of my trowel, and I try not to be too uniform about it, because if you do it all in one direction, then all your sort of peaks will be in the same direction. And what's good about doing it this way is that you get a nice thin layer, so you don't get too much of the paste, so it won't affect your postage, like weight wise or thickness wise, and also it's not too bulky, it just looks quite delicate. Okay, so once I've done that, I'm just going to run my trowel just around those edges, and then I tend to take my finger just to remove any rough sections there. Okay, so I'll just get rid of the paste and give my desk another quick wipe. Okay, and then what I tend to do is I tend to just take literally a pinch of my glitter, and I'm just going to sprinkle it over the top of my paste, tap it off, and there you go. So that's now had its glitter. So I'm going to allow that to dry properly. It won't take too long. It's let's say it's a thin coat, so by the time we've done all the other elements, it will soon be done. So I'll pop that to one side. And now everything's covered in glitter, of course. So if I bring my card back in now so that you can see sort of what we're looking to achieve. Now, first of all, as I said to you, I use the Cherry Blossoms dies, and it's this sort of branch here. And I cut 2 of them out in early espresso cardstock, okay? I then also cut 2 of the end pieces, so here and here, from Poppy Parade. If it's easier for you to cut the whole thing out, you can, but obviously we don't use this bit in the red in the middle. So I'm going to put them over there. And then what I did, and I will show you on this one here, I actually cut the ends off, try and give them a sort of a rounded effect, and then I've glued them to the end of the actual twigs themselves. So if I show you quickly on this one, and again, you don't need to be too precise about this. It's nature after all. So I'm going to add some glue onto the berry ends. Now I left them held together like this so I could see which one I was working on at any given time. So I'm just going to sort of round that edge as I cut that end off. I'm going to grab some tweezers, so much easier with tweezers, and then I'm going to stick that onto the end. So the longest time really for this project is actually cutting out the elements. It's not the actual putting of the card together really, it's just getting all the elements cut ready. Hence why I cut them before I started. Okay, so now that they're all stuck together, so that's our actual berry branches done. I do cut them around a little bit just to arrange them, which you'll see in a while. But first of all, I wanted to make them look a little bit more like berries. So just on the ends, I'm taking an early espresso pen, and I'm just adding some little ends to my berries so that they look like they're meant to be little berries. Okay, I also took the Stampin' chalk marker just to add some white details to them. I'm going to do that afterwards once I've stuck them onto my card, because I did it first on the first ones, and then of course my snow wasn't quite in the right places, so I'm going to do that afterwards. But the next thing we need to do is to cut our pine cones. So I've pre-cut two of the top layer, and then all I'm going to do is stamp two in early espresso ink, and these are these pine cones here from the Peaceful Boughs, so it's the larger of the two pine cones. And this is just on to Very Vanilla. I found Very Vanilla to be a bit better for the actual card rather than Whisper White, because it was a little bit too stark, the Whisper White, even with the snow. So that's why I've used Very Vanilla. So I'm just going to trim those off there. Now what I want you to do is just to take the water brush that we were using earlier, and I don't want it too wet, I just want it to be damp, and I'm literally washing over the top of my pine cone. Now I'm washing just over the top completely because it's just far easier. We want this to be coloured, so it's going to show through the holes in the actual top layer of the pine cone. We want it to be brown, but we don't need to be careful how we do that. It's you'll see in a moment, it covers it entirely. So now I've done that, I'm just going to use the other die, which is the open pine cone die, just to cut those out. So I'll do that now. Okay, so that's my pine cones now cut. So what I need to do is to glue these onto the top of them. So I'm literally just going to take the top off one of our embellishment pots and a sponge with a little squirt of our glue. Just because these are quite fiddly, I just find this easier to do it this way, really. As I say, this is why you didn't need to be too precise about the actual painting, because once they're glued on top, you don't actually see a huge amount of that detail underneath. Okay, so that's all our elements ready. now what I want to do is just to stamp my greeting onto that top corner. Now I've taken my greeting from the Tag Buffet stamp set, and it's this one here, but of course any greeting would suffice. And again, I'm just using early espresso, so I just want to make sure I'm nicely inked. I'm just going to hold it there just for a second, because this is onto watercolour paper, which naturally has a texture on it. So whereas Whisper White is sort of like a polished card, this has got a bit of a texture. So I just allow that ink just to sort of soak into it just a little bit longer than I normally would. Okay, so now we need to start popping everything together. So the first thing I did was I actually cut these in half. So this piece here, I just literally cut so that I had two pieces like that. And I'm going to do the same again with this one, so that I've got more pieces to play with, and then I can sort of work out where I want things to go. So I'm going to start off with one over here. So I am just going to use my Tombow for this. If you prefer to use sort of the sponge method, I was using before, then that's fine. I'm just using Tombow just on the thicker areas really. I'm not too concerned about it being glued down completely. So I'm going to start off with one over here. And as I say, this is virtually dry now. It is a little bit tacky, but not anything to speak of. Okay, and then I'm going to take one of the ones with the two berries on it. Just little dots of glue, sufficient just to hold these down. And again, I'm just going to bring it across like that. It doesn't really matter where you position them, it's entirely up to you. So once I had these two into place, I then added my pine cones, because I then wanted to see sort of where they sat and where the rest of my sort of twigs were going to go. So I mounted these using our Stampin' Dimensionals. So I'm doing one at a time, and I'm just going to lay them just where I think they would look nice. And you could of course have one sort of laying down. Perhaps I'll do that this time, because these are sort of fallen off a tree or a branch or something. So they're, you know, they're absolutely, it doesn't matter where they go. You see I've picked up so much glitter, it's all over everything. So the next thing I want to do is to sort of rearrange where I want the other twigs and berries to go. So what I did was I just sort of positioned them where I thought they might look quite nice, and then I cut away sort of areas of them. So like here, for example, I'm going to cut this one because I'm going to use this twig as an extra piece, perhaps down the bottom here. So I'm going to add some glue to my three berries. And I'm just going to make sure that tucks behind so that you don't see that end piece. So add some glue to this twig. Now obviously these pieces are a little bit more fiddly. But so if you just use little pieces of glue rather than try and do too much at a time, then it sort of will sit okay. And I'm just going to stick, tuck it underneath and stick that on top of my snow. And I've got another one here, which again I think I'm just going to trim off here. But I'm using all the pieces, so although I'm trimming them, I am still sort of using them. around there again. Oh, I'm very glittery. What's Christmas without glitter, eh? There again here, and you can just sort of put them wherever you want to, because obviously twigs will go in any which way, so it really doesn't matter which way you put them. Obviously sticking onto this paste is a little bit of a challenge, because it's a different sort of texture, and also of course it's got glitter on it as well. Okay, so that's all in position, so I'm quite happy with that. So now what I want to do is to bring in the chalk marker, which I spoke to you about earlier, and I'm just going to add some what would be sort of snow that's sort of fallen on top of the berries. This is quite subtle because obviously it's a chalk, so it's not sort of a bright white, but it's just really a hint of where the snow might have fallen and collected on your branch. If you wanted to, you could of course add some paste onto this and do it that way. That's, you know, that's entirely up to you. Obviously it's quite fiddly on little sections, so but if you feel so inclined. Okay, so now I've done that, I definitely want to add some more snow to underneath where my pine cones are, and also to the tops of my pine cones, because I think otherwise it looks like it's sort of floating a little bit. So we want to just add those in. So I just mislaid my palette knife, there we go. So again, now this time I'm just going to almost sort of push it underneath my pine cones here, just to blend it sort of through. And I'm also adding some to the bottom of these branches here as well. So again, this is going to be a bit thicker, but that's fine, because it's just building up so it looks like it's actually sitting on snow as opposed to as I say, floating. So I'm going onto the actual pine cone itself as well, and to the bottom, and also where the twigs are. Okay, and then finally I want to add some more snow just to the top of my pine cone. Now you can do this as thick or as light as you want. I'm not going to add too much. As I say, like before, once it's on, you can just sort of rough it up and give it that sort of snowy texture to it. Okay, so move my desk around a little bit today. So now that's done, I just want to add a little bit more glitter just to where I've added that extra snow, because obviously it's not sparkling like the rest of it. So just a little bit over the top. So there we go. So that's our actual card front done. So now all that's left is for us to actually glue it onto our card. I have paste, I have glitter, look. So I'm going to take my now again, the Fluid 100 paper does take a little bit more sticking down than our Whisper White, just because it's thicker and it's got that sort of texture to it, and obviously because it's been wet, it's also possibly got a bit of a bow in it, because obviously it with the wet water on it, it sort of buckles it slightly. There we go. And then that's straight onto our card base. So there we go. So that's two very slightly different cards done with the same technique. The pine cones are just sort of slightly different place. But I think equally they look sort of quite effective. I liked the sort of berries and the snow, and I thought it sort of really added to the actual card itself. So I hope that's sort of shown you how sometimes our dies can be just as versatile as our stamps. As I say, there was very little stamping in this card today. It was all about the die cuts, but it is nice to be able to use them for something else other than their main intention. So it makes them sort of even more versatile and obviously more cost effective. So I hope you liked that today, and I will see you next week for another Monday mashup. And thanks for joining me. Take care. Bye.